The Choking Ghost, near Sandyford Place, Glasgow, by Elliott O'Donnell. The last time I was passing through Glasgow, I put up for the night at a hotel near Sandyford Place, and met there an old theatrical acquaintance named Brown, Helly Brown. Not having seen him since I gave up acting, which is now, alas, a good many years, we had much to discuss. Touring days, lodgings, managers, crowds, and a dozen other subjects, all included in the vulgar term shop. We spent the whole of the evening debating thus in the smoke-room, while the following night we went to an entertainment given by the charming reciter and raconteur, Miss Lillian North, who, apart from her talent, which in my opinion places her in the first rank of her profession, is the possessor of extraordinary personal attractions, not the least remarkable of which are her hands. Indeed, it was through my attention being called to the latter that I am indirectly indebted for this story. Miss North has typically psychic hands, exquisitely white and narrow, and her long tapering fingers and filbert nails, which, by the way, are always trimly manicured, are the most perfect I have ever seen. I was alluding to them on our way back to the hotel after her performance, when Helly Brown interrupted me. "Talking about psychic things, O'Donnell," he said, "do you know there is a haunted house near where you are staying?" "You don't?" "Very well. Then if I tell you what I know and you write about it, will you promise not to allude to the house by its right number? If you do, there will be the dickens to pay. Simply call it the house near Sandyford Place." "You promise?" "Good. Let us take a little stroll before we turn in. I feel I want a breath of fresh air, and I will tell you the experience there. It is exactly 2 years ago, and I was on tour here, in the Green Bushes. All the usual theatrical diggings had been snapped up long before I had arrived, and not knowing where else to go, I went to Sandyford Place, which I saw advertised in one of the local papers as a first-class private hotel with very moderate charges. A wild bit of extravagance, eh? But then one does foolish things sometimes, and, to tell the truth, I wanted a change badly. I had digged for a long time with a fellow named Charlie Grosvenor, and not a bad chap, but rather apt to get on one's nerve after a while, and he had got on mine horribly. Consequently, I was not at all sorry for an excuse to get away from him for a bit, even though I had paid dearly for it. A private hotel in a neighborhood like the Sandyford Place is a big order for an ordinary comedian. I forgot exactly what the terms were, but I know I pulled rather a long face when I was told what it was. Still, being, as I said, tired of the usual digs, I determined to try it, and accordingly found myself landed in a nice-sized bedroom on the second floor. The first 3 nights passed, and nothing happened, saving that I had the most diabolical nightmares, a very unusual thing for me. It was the cheese, I said to myself when I got out of bed the first morning. I will take very good care I don't touch the cheese tonight. I kept this resolution, but I had the nightmare again, and even if anything worse than before. Then I fancied it must be the cocoa. I was at the time a teetotaler, so I took hot milk instead. But I had nightmares all the same, and my dreams terrified me so to the extent that I did not dare get out of bed in the morning. It was then winter, till it was broad daylight. It was now becoming a serious matter with me. As you know, an actor more than most people needs sleep, and it soon became as much as I could do to maintain my usual standard of acting. On the 4th night, determining to get rest at all cost, I took a stiff glass of hot brandy just before getting into bed. I slept. I could scarcely help sleeping, but not for long. I was rudely awakened from my slumbers by a loud crash. I sat up in bed, thinking the whole house was falling around my ears. The sound was not repeated, and all was profoundly silent. Wondering what on earth the noise could have been, and feeling very thirsty, I got out of bed to get a drink of lime juice. To my annoyance, however, though I groped about everywhere, knocking an ashtray off the mantelpiece and smashing the lid of a soap dish, I could find neither the lime juice nor matches. At length, giving it up as a bad job, I decided to get back into bed again. With that end in view, I groped my way through the darkness, steering myself by the furniture, the position of which was, of course, quite familiar to me. At least I imagined it was. Judge then of my astonishment when I could not find the bed. At first I regarded it as a huge joke and laughed. How rich! Fancy not being able to find one's way back to the bed in a room of this dimension. Good enough for Punch. Too good, perhaps now. But it soon grew past a joke. I had been around the room completely. Round the room. Twice. And still no bed. I became seriously alarmed. Could I be ill? Was I going mad? But no, my forehead was cool, my pulse normal. For some seconds I stood still, not knowing what else to do. Then, to make one more desperate attempt, I stuck straight out in front of me and ran into something that recoiled and hit me. Thrilled with amazement, I put my hand to feel what it was and touched a noose. "A noose?" I screamed, interrupting Haley Brown for the first time since he began. "Yes, a noose," he repeated, "suspended in midair." As you can imagine, I was greatly astonished, for I knew there had been nothing that I could be now mistaking for a noose in the room overnight. I stretched out my arms to feel what it was fastened to, but to add to my surprise, the cord terminated in thin air. Then I grew frightened. With a gentle purring sound, the noose commenced fawning. I use the word because the action was so intensely bestial, so like that of a cat or a snake around my neck and face. It then rose above me, and after circling furiously around and around and around and creating a miniature maelstrom in the air, it descended gradually over my head, lower and lower. It stole like some sleep-caressing slug, now past the tips of my ears, now my nose, and now my chin, until a tiny thud landed it upon my shoulders, when with a fierce snap it suddenly tightened. I endeavored to tear it off, but every time I raised my mouth to shriek for help, an icy current of air froze the breath in my lungs. I raised my hands. A strong magnetic force drew them to my side again. I was helpless, O'Donnell, utterly, wholly helpless. Cold, clammy hands tore my feet from the floor. I was hoisted bodily up and then dropped. A frightful pain shot through me. 100 wires cut into my throat at once. I gasped, choked, suffocated, and in my mad efforts to find a foothold, kicked out frantically in all directions. But this only resulted in an increase of my torment, since with every plunge the noose grew tighter. My agony at last grew unbearable. I could feel the sides of my raw and palpitating thorax giving into one another. Every attempt to heave up breath from my bursting lungs was rewarded with the most excruciating paroxysms of pain more acute than I thought it possible for any human being to endure. My head became 10 times its normal size, blood foaming, boiling, pouring into it from God knows where, and under its pressure my eyes bulged in their sockets, and the veins in my nose cracked. Terrific thunderings echoed and re-echoed in my ears. My tongue, huge as a mountain, shot against my teeth. A sea of fire raged through my brain, and then blackness. Blackness inconceivable. When I recovered consciousness, O'Donnell, I found myself standing, cold and shivering, but otherwise sound and wholly on the chilly oilcloth. I had now no difficulty in finding my way back to my bed. In about an hour's time, succeeded in falling asleep. I slept late and, on getting up, tried to persuade myself that my horrible experience was but the result of another nightmare. As you may guess, after all this, I did not look forward to bedtime and counted the minutes as they flew by with the utmost regret. Never had I been so sorry when my performance at the theater was over and the lights of my hotel once again were in sight. I entered my room in fear and trembling, and was so apprehensive lest I should be again compelled to undergo the sensation of hanging that I decided to keep a light burning all night, and for that reason had bought a half-pound of wax candles. At last I grew so sleepy that I could keep awake no longer, and placed the candlestick on my chair by the bed. I scrambled in between the sheets. Without as much as a sip of spirits, I slept like a top. When I awoke, the room was in pitch darkness. A curious smell at once attracted my notice. I thought at first it might be the passing illusion of a dream, but no. I sniffed again. There it was, there, close to me, under my very nose, the strong, pungent odor of drugs. But not being a professor of smells, nor even a humble student of physics, I was consequently unable to diagnose it, and could only arrive at the general conclusion that it was a smell that brought with it very vivid recollections of a chemist's shop and of my old school laboratory. Wondering whence it originated, I thrust my face forward with the intention of trying to locate it, when to my horror, my lips touched against something that was cold and flabby. In an agony of fear, I reeled away from it, and the bed being narrow, I slipped over the edge and bumped onto the floor. Now I think it is quite possible that up to this point you may have attributed my unhappy experience to nothing more nor less than a bad dream, but your dream theory can no longer hold good, for on coming in such sudden contact with the floor, I gave my funny bone a knock, which I can assure you made me thoroughly awake, and the first thing I noticed on recovering my scattered senses was the smell. I sat up and saw to my terror my bed was occupied, but occupied in the most alarming manner. On the middle of the pillow was a face, the face of... I looked closer. I would have given every penny I possessed not to have done so, but I could not help myself. I looked closer, and it was the face of my brother Ralph. You may recollect my mentioning him to you, for he was the only one of us who was at that time making money, whom I believed to be in New York. He had always been rather sallow, but apart from that fact, he now looked very yellow. His appearance was quite natural. Indeed, as I gazed at him, I grew so convinced it was he that I cried out, "Ralph!" The moment I did, there was a ghastly change. His eyelids opened, and his eyes, I recognized at once, protruded to such a degree that they almost rolled out. His mouth flew open, his tongue swelled, and his whole countenance became convulsed with the most unparalleled, and for that reason indescribable, expression of agony, while the yellowness of his complexion deepened to a livid, lurid black that was so inconceivably repellent and hellish that I sprang away from the bed, appalled. There was then a gasping, rasping noise, and a voice that, despite its unnatural hollowness, I identified that of Ralph, and it broke forth. "I have been wanting to speak to you for ages, but something I cannot explain has always prevented me. I have been dead a month, not cancer, but Dolly. Poison. Goodbye, Healy. I shall rest in peace now. The voice stopped. There was a rush of cold air laden with the scent of the drug and tainted, faintly tainted, with the nauseating smell of the grave. And the face on the pillow vanished. How I got through the remainder of the night I cannot say. I dare only remember that I did not sleep. I was devoted to Ralph, and the thought that he had perished in the miserable manner suggested by the apparition completely prostrated me. In the morning I received a black-edged letter from my mother stating that she had just heard from Dolly, my brother's wife, saying Ralph had died from cancer in the throat. Dolly added in a postscript that her dearly beloved Ralph had been very good to her and left her well provided for. Of course, we might have had the body exhumed, but we were poor, and Ralph's widow was rich, and in America, everything goes in favor of the dollars. Hence we were obliged to let the matter drop, sincerely trusting Dolly would never take it into her head to visit us. She never did. My mother died last year. I felt her death terribly, O'Donnell. And as I no longer have any fixed abode, but am always touring the British provinces, there's not much fear of Ralph's murderess and I meeting. It is rather odd, however, that after my own experience at the hotel, I heard that it had borne the reputation for being haunted for many years, and that a good many visitors who had passed the night in one of the rooms, presumably mine, had complained of hearing strange noises and having dreadful dreams. How can one explain it all? One can't, I responded, as we turned in for the night. The end.